Hi, it's Dwyer, GamblersAdvisory.com, here with some thoughts on the upcoming fight at cruiserweight between Denis Lebedev and James Lights Out Toney. But before I go further, just remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. You know, it is true that Denis Lebedev is mostly one-handed. He has an A-plus left hand, right? Unfortunately, he doesn't have anything close to that in his right. He is a southpaw. That left hand has gotten him big-time KOs against people like Alexander Alexeyev, right? He is explosive with his left. But like Miguel Cotto and like Manny Pacquiao, in my opinion, the absence of a meaningful right hand makes him predictable to a counterpuncher like James Toney. Counterpunchers will come in, they will neutralize your best weapon. And if James Toney can sit there and figure out when Denis Lebedev's left hand is going to hit, then that's going to be to Lebedev's disadvantage. It's also true that in the recent Roy Jones fight that Denis Lebedev won by KO in the 10th round, that at the time of the KO, Denis Lebedev was actually behind on one of the judges' scorecards. What that tells me is simply that Denis Lebedev, by the way, I thought that judge was correct. What that tells me is that Denis Lebedev isn't really a great boxer. He's a puncher. He takes you out. He has a greater than 70% knockout ratio. But he's not a great boxer. He's not going to go in there and outpoint you. And that's important when he's in against a master boxer. And it's also true that Denis Lebedev is a stalker. He comes forward, right? Longtime subscribers know my view is that you have to know how to fight backing up. You have to have not quite an off switch, but a different gear to keep your opponent guessing. I don't think Denis Lebedev has that gear, right? He's in your face with a lethal left hand, and he's very aggressive, right? The problem is simply, again, he's fighting a counterpuncher. If you're always aggressive, if you're always coming forward, if you're not backing up like a Sergio Martinez or a Floyd Mayweather, and viewers may know that the headbutt that Victor Ortiz hit Mayweather with, Mayweather was up on the ropes. Mayweather uses the entire ring. Denis Lebedev does not. Lebedev is always coming forward. James Toney should know exactly where he is in the ring. Lebedev should be right in front of James Toney. So what that tells me is that Denis Lebedev is made to order for James Toney, a younger James Toney, not this James Toney. This James Toney, in my opinion, is so diminished that my recommendation, given the styles that seem to favor James Toney, my recommendation in this fight is that you take Denis Lebedev to win the fight. I just think that James Toney, at 43 years old, 11 years older than Denis Lebedev, who's 32. Lebedev is older than you think. But keep in mind, James Toney at 43 years old, I believe, is going to lose this fight. Let's go further. I even think that Toney, who has never been stopped in more than 60 fights, might even get stopped in the later rounds of this fight. I think if you're a portfolio bettor, if you're just picking a winner, I would pick Denis Lebedev. If you're a portfolio bettor, you might want to break off a little piece of that and put it on Denis Lebedev by KO. Let's talk about why. You know, in February of this year, you remember February 24th of this year, in his last fight, James Toney weighed 257 pounds. The cruiserweight limit's 200. From his last fight to now, James Toney at 43 years old is going to have to lose 57 pounds. I'm a skeptic. As people who read my book, though, I feel that older fighters who try to drop down in weight class are a recipe for disaster. Just look at Chris Bird's results when he tried to later in his career drop down. And James Toney is an old 43, right? Some guys are well preserved. Bernard Hopkins, Evander Holyfield, Antonio Tarver. Some guys are well preserved. Some guys aren't as well preserved. I think James Toney is in the latter category. In fact, James Toney hasn't weighed 200 pounds since April of 2003. Right? He's literally, for the last 8 years, been a heavyweight. Think about it. Where was Manny Pacquiao in 2003? 2003 was light years ago in boxing. You should consider boxing as going forward in dog years. Right? 3 years ago was a long time ago. 8 years ago, that's way too long. So I think physically Toney's going to have problems. He'll start great. He's going to fade in this fight, in my opinion. Also, let's face it. He's been fading in boxing for years. He's been less than scintillating. People may remember his gift draw with Hasim Rahman. You know what? That draw was such a gift that one of the judges on that fight had Rahman ahead by 5 or more rounds. Take a look at it. Also, he lost twice to Sam Peter. Keep in mind, the last loss was in January of 2007, and it was obvious when Sam Peter was outboxing him in the rematch that he was no longer the James Toney we remember. He also had 2 split decisions, right? And let's just say neither of these guys would be confused with a Klitschko. And they were the Danny Batchelor and Frezakendo. And let me say this. If Frezakendo wasn't deducted a point in that fight, very questionably, that fight would have been a draw on the scorecards. Not only that, his last 2 fights have been against guys who lost their preceding fights. James Toney further has been relatively inactive. He's only fought once since the end of 2009. Denis Lebedev is world class. I thought he beat cruiserweight champion Marco Huck. Don't believe me. One of the judges had him winning by, I believe, 3 or 4 rounds in that fight. Also, Lebedev is in great shape. He went 12 rounds against Marco Huck. He knocked out Roy Jones in the 10th round. He also has been fighting world-class fighters. Before he fought the 2 guys I just mentioned, he also fought Alexander Alexeyev, an excellent fighter, who was the gold medalist at the 2008 Olympics. I consider Lebedev to be one of the best cruiserweights in the world. I think that, if you think cruiserweight, you're thinking Steve Cunningham, you're thinking Antonio Tarver. I think Denis Lebedev belongs in that class. I think James Toney has picked the wrong fighter this time. I think Denis Lebedev beats James Toney. In fact, I'm worried about what happens to James in the latter part of the fight. Let's remember Sugar Ray Leonard against Roberto Duran. Duran, the second fight, the rematch. Duran had to lose a lot of weight to make weight. Late in that fight, he then claimed to have stomach cramps and found a way out. I think James Toney, if this fight gets to, let's say, the 9th round and James Toney is getting battered and realizes that the weight loss has impacted his performance, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't try to find a way out. Finally, this fight is in Russia, so Denis Lebedev should have a pretty good crowd behind him. I like Lebedev in this one. Let me know what you think. Leave your comments for me here on YouTube and visit us at gamblersadvisory.com. All I ask is that after the fight, win, lose, or draw, you stop by with your post-fight report. Thanks for watching.